private member statements. I call the member for Balmain.
Thank you, Madam Temporary Speaker. I rise this evening to address the 2014 federal budget, its impact on my community and the state of New South Wales. This budget is so regressive, so blatantly inequitable that even our Liberal Premier described its measures as a kick in the guts. It's clear that most Australians now understand that the burden of spending cuts, benefit changes and tax increases in the budget will be imposed on the sick, pensioners, the young, sole parents and others who are least able to afford them. The Greens are committed to blocking these budget measures in the Federal Senate. We will block these measures because we want Australia that is a kind Australia, one that takes care of its sick, its disadvantaged, instead of kicking them into the street. We will block these measures because we believe that at a time when Australia is feeling the impact of climate change, it is immensely self-destructive to ignore the imperatives to convert to renewable energy. We Greens have a vision for a more livable, sustainable community that supports future generations and our planet. We want an accessible higher education system that will enrich us all as a nation. We know that the budget will hit those most vulnerable people in our society the hardest. My electorate is diverse, but people share many similar concerns about public transport, about public education, climate change and urban planning. The budget is a slap in their faces since it completely ignores many of these concerns. New South Wales now faces funding cuts of $2 billion for services, including the all-important health and education budgets. That means less money for public schools and the promised Gonski reforms, less money for families, a boost for the filthy coal-fired powered energy sector and a nod to big developers to continue making profits at the expense of the community. This budget means less money for public transport infrastructure that Sydney desperately needs to make it more livable. The federal government has ruled out investing in public transport, yet there is more and more money for tollways, like the loan of $2 billion to fast-track the WestConnex tollway, which means more congestion, more traffic, more inducement of traffic and, of course, more pollution. This budget means the most disadvantaged people in my community will be further marginalised and left out in the cold. The 2011 census showed that 12% of people in the Glebe and Forest Lodge and Camperdown areas of my community live in public housing. Public housing residents are often stigmatised as people who are looking for a handout. Nothing could be further from the truth. People who live in public housing are there through a series of hardships that anyone would find hard to endure. They're often making the best of terrible circumstances and should be applauded for being brave and consistent in the face of this adversity. For many, the $7 co-payment for a visit to the GP and the $5 additional charge on prescriptions does not seem significant. But if you're a low-income family struggling to support your children, like many of the neighbourhoods in my electorate where 10% of households earn less than $600 a week, $7 can be significant. Planning for that school excursion to the museum, the school uniform, supplies that need to be bought, the weekly bills become more stressful than ever. And under this budget, there will be no school kids bonus to lend a hand, and there will be less assistance to meet the rising cost of childcare. And if your child is unemployed and under 30 and is excluded from receiving unemployment benefits for 6 months, what is the future of that young person and their family? My electorate has the highest number of working women in the state, and the costs that I mentioned of running families and running budgets are real. And once they leave school, the young people who are finding it tougher and tougher to get into the workforce, as I mentioned, will now be further disadvantaged by a 6-month delay in receiving New Start allowances to assist in their search for employment. At the same time, the options for skills learning at TAFE are being slashed and TAFE fees are being increased. Meanwhile, the deregulation of university fees will deter many of our brightest students or saddle them with huge debts that many will turn their backs on going to university at all. Besides destroying universal health care, penalising youth for their inexperience and the assault on public education, the Liberal federal government is spending $245 million on school chaplains. Many school counsellors will be losing their jobs because they are not religious. Not 1 cent of that money can be spent on secular counsellors. According to an essential report this week, this spend is supported by only 5% of Australians. It is a use of public money to push a religious agenda in our public schools that is not supported by the public. But this slash and burn budget reaches further than we've ever seen in its raw ideology and its embrace for a neoconservative ideal that most Australians want nothing to do with. No one in our community will be unscathed if these budget measures are allowed to pass, and we will do all we can to oppose them. And I am holding a public meeting in my community next Tuesday at Glebe Public School to bring people together to raise up our voices against this unfair, regressive budget.